I did want to start though by introducing Alain a little bit more, kind of giving you a heads up or more of an introduction to who he is. So Alain, actually, we met through the Angular GDE program, and also because he's just such a repeat and loved speaker at ng-conf and the ng-conf events. So we've always really appreciated his insights and his expertise. But on top of being an Angular GDE, he's also a Microsoft MVP and an official Cypress ambassador. So here we are with Cypress. But then he's also the owner and like the primary teacher at a website called Angular Training. And so he's very skilled at going in and working with companies and individuals and just giving them top-notch training with Angular. And it's what he's built his whole career on here, like personally. So Angular is a very great skill of his, Cypress and testing, and we just feel really lucky to have him here. Yeah. So I do have a question for you though, Alain. You are a Cypress ambassador. Obviously, testing is important to you, but how have you found that really mastering testing has helped your career?
Yeah, so there's a funny fact about me is that when I started my career, so I did everything in computer science and coding for a very, very long time. So in university, I was studying computer science, and during my last year for my master's degree, I had to do an internship in a company for 6 months, right? And the funny thing is that that internship was all about unit testing. So it was not JavaScript, it was not Angular. Angular didn't even exist back then. I'm too old, I guess. But it was in Java, and I had to unit test something like 700,000 lines of code, pretty much from scratch, and get the coverage as high as I could in 6 months, right? And so, because I'm crazy, I took the task like to heart, and at the end of my internship, I had 99% coverage of everything. So basically they said, oh, this guy is crazy, they hired me, and it started my entire career. So testing basically got me my first job and got me into, everything I've been doing since then. So it's, I have a love story with testing from the very beginning of my career, basically because of that. And that was unit testing, but then, when Cypress came up, I was a front-end guy, decided to get into that. And yeah, I've been using it on every single front-end project I've been involved with, for the past, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. So yeah, fun story of how testing changed my life initially and then became a recurrent theme everywhere I went and with every project I was involved in. Yeah.
Nice. Well, awesome. I love that. So, okay, then yeah, I'll just turn the time over to you. I want to make sure you have enough time to do everything in your presentation.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about Cypress for end-to-end testing. So I'm going to focus on the end-to-end stuff of Cypress, but just so you know, we could also do component testing with Cypress. So we could tell Cypress, display this specific component and test it on its own, right? So you can test the entire application, or you can just say, load one component, do your thing. That's also a possibility. And if we have time, maybe I'll show you some of that stuff toward the end. Just remind me in the Q&A and everything if needed. So in terms of intro, yeah, I think we already did it quite a bit. So my name is Alain. I'm a GDE in Angular and Google Maps, Cypress ambassador, a Microsoft MVP in web technologies. Yeah, I've been involved in front-end development since 2011, started with the very first version of Angular JS back then, and I've been working with it on a daily basis since then. So I've been doing Angular for 14 years now, which sounds crazy, but that's what it is. And so yeah, I run angulartraining.com, where I do consulting, training. So that's, you know, online sessions like this, or in-person training where I travel to an office and do a 3-5 day training session with a company, basically. And yeah, probably many of you have seen me at conferences, at ng-conf and other places. I've spoken at conferences on every single continent but Antarctica, because there's not too many conferences down there. But yeah, I've been speaking about all these things for quite some time now, and all over the place. So Cypress, what is Cypress? So Cypress is a complete end-to-end testing experience for anything that runs in a browser. This means that when you start using Cypress, you don't have to worry about installing extra tools and stuff. You get everything, right? It's all in one place. It's the entire experience that you run with Cypress, which means you write your tests with Cypress, you run them with Cypress, you debug with Cypress, you record everything with Cypress. So it's really not just end-to-end testing, but end-to-end experience, right? Everything is in one environment. The entire experience is managed by the tool and the, it's not even a framework at this point. It's really more than that. The entire experience really is driven by Cypress. And we'll see what this means in action very, very shortly. To be realistic, I have my favorite license plate store at store.angulartraining.com, which is a live fake website where you can browse license plates, you can add them to a cart, we can change the currency of our store by selecting a different currency here, and go to the cart page, remove items from my cart, then I can check out and enter the info in a form. So all of these basic things that we do in web applications, so we can test everything with Cypress. That's our goal. So that's what I'm going to be playing with in my demos and everything. So if I want to do a first test with Cypress, first thing you would need to do is npm install Cypress, of course, right? So npm install Cypress gives you everything. So it's going to install it. It's gonna then, when you run it for the first time, set up your environment, create the right files and the folder structure where you're gonna have your tests. Usually, I do this in my Angular project. So if I'm testing an Angular app, I'm gonna run Cypress within my Angular project. So it creates all of that testing structure, you know, just aside from my Angular code. So everything is in the same repo. Which it doesn't have to be, right? It could be a separate thing, but I find it convenient to have everything in one place. So if you start writing a first Cypress test, the funny thing is that it's gonna look very much like what you already do with Jasmine or Jest, because it's using the same kind of functions, describe, it, and Cypress itself is based on Mocha and Chai. But you can, right, that syntax makes sense. If you've done any sort of testing with Angular or JavaScript, you'll recognize that sort of syntax where you have a describe function, which is basically a bunch of tests that you group together, you give them a name. So here, license plate store homepage, and then we have a function where we can have all of our individual tests. And these individual tests are it functions. And in this one, I'm just going to check that we display the right title. And then that's my actual unit test. Well, not unit test in here. And that's where things become Cypress specific. And we have this Cypress object, CY, that has all sorts of commands and things we can use, right, to drive our browser and make things happen. And so this visit command is just going to open my website in the Cypress environment. So let's give it a shot. I'm going to open a terminal here, and I'm going to run that command. So first test run, we'll do npx cypress open, which you can do after the npm install, of course. So let's open another terminal here. I'm gonna move to the right place, which is ngx store or something else. Let me check the name of that repo. I have like 70 repos here, so that's, yeah, ng store Cypress, that's the right one. And so once I'm inside that project, I can do npx cypress open. I'm running that command, and what it's going to do is, as you'll see, it's going to open a browser window. So it's going to open Google Chrome by default, because that's my default browser. And then it's going to ask us a few things. Take some time, suspense. Well, actually, the first window is actually a Cypress window. And the Cypress window is going to ask me to pick what I want to do. So that's Cypress loading. I decide, do I want to do end-to-end testing or component testing? We go with end-to-end testing. And then I can choose my browser. So this is everything I have installed on my machine. I'm going with Chrome. So selecting Chrome here, start E2E testing in Chrome. And then it's going to open Google Chrome to run those tests. So first thing you can tell from that is you can use the same tests and run them in different browsers, right? Cypress supports multiple different browsers, and you can run the test in these different places to make sure everything works properly. So now this is Google Chrome with my Cypress tests displayed in it. And the first one I want to show you is this one that I showed you on the slide. So just opening the main page. And it is this demo here. So I click on that spec. And now this is the Cypress runtime loading my tests. And you'll see, so on the left-hand side, we have the tests that are running. And on the right-hand side, this is the browser window with the application, the test in progress. So you see that the test completed and it was successful. Let's see if I can annotate here. That's what I like with Zoom. I can draw on the screen. So my test passed, and we can see here on the left a description of what happened. So the text you see up here is, it comes from the describe function and the it function in my code, which means if I show you my source code here, you'll see that those are the same things, right? So displays the right main title, license plate store homepage. So Cypress is using those description to show us the tests in here. And then the different commands that we run are being displayed. So in my case, there's just one, visit store.angulartraining.com. It's loaded here. There was no error, so the test is successful. Now, of course, I haven't tested anything here. It was just loading the app in the browser. Didn't test really anything. So if I wanted to actually do some testing, how would I do that? The first thing is that when you want to test something, you want to check that it's displayed on the screen, right? Because it's all about testing the UI, testing what's going to show up on the screen or not. So the easiest command from Cypress to do that is called contains. And so if I want to check that my website displays the text welcome to our store, like so, I can add a command cy.contains welcome to our store. Now what's really nice about this is that I don't need any specific selector. I don't need to know where this element is displayed on the screen. I don't need to know, I don't need to wait for it to be rendered. So if there's a delay or anything like this, Cypress takes care of all of that automatically, which is one of the best parts of it, from my perspective. So the idea is that when you look for something on the screen, by default, Cypress will wait 4 seconds for this to happen. So it's going to check, do we have that text on the screen? Yes, no. No, or let's wait. And try again, up to 4 seconds. And then if you don't have it on the screen after 4 seconds, then the test fails. And so this is really built on the idea that modern web applications, everything is asynchronous. We download our data from a server, it takes some time, and so everything is dynamic and changing over time. So the timeouts and the wait time is built in for each command, which I think is really powerful because no more async await, no more manual wait for 10 seconds just for something to happen. It makes our code a lot cleaner and a lot easier to read. So let's see. I'm just going to take that command, right, and use it now in that test. So adding it, so now we're actually testing something. cy.contains welcome to our store. I save my tests, and the nice thing is that as soon as I change it, so Cypress is now continuously running in the background, watching my code and rerunning the test as I change it. So very much like when you do ng tests in Angular or when you do ng-serve, right? The command is constantly watching your code, recompiling and rerunning things. Same thing with Cypress. When you have Cypress open, it's going to run your code as you make changes. And here you can see that it did it. So it rerun my test and it was successful. So now we see that second command contains welcome to our store. It's passed, so everything is green. And where it gets even more powerful is that when I go over that command, it's showing me which element was found with that text displayed. And not only that, it's showing me the state of the application at that point in time. So like it was frozen, and you can see that at that point in time, we didn't have the data yet down here. We didn't have the license plates, but the title was loaded. So this command was successful. So yeah, we can visit a website, we can check that things are displayed properly. Now, of course, we probably want to test more, right? We want to test more than just the text is on the screen. And we have plenty of options for that. If you want to go deeper into, if you want to test a CSS, for instance, hey, this text should be visible and have a font weight of 300, or should be using this specific font, or should have this specific color, or whatever, right? You can go as deep as you want, as specific as you want, and you can chain multiple assertions with should, like this. So you basically select an element by text, and then you run multiple assertions on it. It should be visible, it should have the following CSS, it should have, whatever size, font, color, whatever, right? You can have as many checks as you want. Now, the interesting part of be visible here is that it's going to make sure it's actually visible to the user, meaning there's nothing on top of the text, so there's no overlay on top of it. The user doesn't have to scroll down to see it. It's really in the viewport and 100% visible. So this assertion can be very interesting in many scenarios, right? It's not just it's on the screen, it's in the DOM and visible from the user. They don't have to scroll down. There's no dialogue or anything on top of it that would hide it. And there's tons of assertions like this in Cypress. There's a complete guide here with the common assertions. I'm not going to go into it because there's so many that it would take a lot of time. The nice thing is that IDEs are usually aware of this. So I'm using WebStorm, and WebStorm is pretty good with Cypress. So for instance, if I start using an assertion here, and let's say I want to see what other assertions are available, I can do control space, and it's going to suggest all of the possible assertions we have, right? So I get the autocomplete from that string, which can be super useful. So I want it to be visible, and I can see from here that there's also a not be visible. So that's a cool thing. And so now this test is going to run again and pass again. So yeah, expected this to be visible, and it is, so the test also passes. So we can select elements, we can check their CSS, their visibility, and all of that. What's next? What's next?
I want to jump in real quick. I just have a.
Yep, sure.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I actually had one myself. So you said you have Cypress up here, and it's just kind of watching, and as you change code, it re-renders and everything. Does that still work with like the new hot module reload that Angular's been pushing?
So the thing is, it's watching your Cypress code, not the application, right? Because the thing is, when you do end-to-end, your testing code is completely independent from your front-end code. What I'm testing here is basically store.angulartraining.com. So I'm testing my production website, and the code is in a different place, right? I'm not testing on localhost. So as a result, yeah, the hot reload kind of thing would be just for your test, not for the application code. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And it looks like we do have a question in the chat. John asks, how do we test pages that require authentication of login?
That's a very good question, and I think I have some stuff on that coming soon. So I'll show you how we interact with the page, and my example is exactly that. It's a login thing. So we'll get to it very shortly with some good example. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, I'll show you a comparison Cypress with Playwright at the end as well. I see that that question here in the chat, and I can take that question from Chad as well. With Protractor, I use the page object model to define selectors on the page and include some standard form manipulations. Does Cypress work well with that pattern? Yes, you can do that. The thing is, the selectors in Cypress are so, flexible and easy to use that you don't even need a page object model that would describe the structure of your page. That said, for more complex scenarios, like if you need to select an element that's hard to get to, and that's what I'm going to get into with the next command, get, which allows you to use any custom CSS selector. If your selector becomes complex, you can refactor this in a constant, for instance, and have some sort of page object model that would store these constants and give you methods to access them or that sort of thing. So it's still possible to do that, but the thing is, it's usually not even needed because your code is so tiny, you can test so much with so little code usually that it's almost overkill to create a page object model, if that makes sense. So what I do is create constants, and we'll see that we can also create custom commands where you can define, a bunch of different actions that you do all the time, which is kind of similar to what a page object model would do in a sense. But yeah, Cypress has its own tools that make that a lot easier and almost irrelevant as a result, because there's other ways to make it happen a lot more easily. Yeah. So yeah, the next command I want to talk about, so I talked about contains, I talked about assertions. Now we can use get, and get is gonna select by CSS selector. So that's the same thing as in your Angular unit tests when you do, by CSS to check something in a component template. That's, same approach. So this could be any CSS selector. And it follows the same rule, so it's going to be retried if the element is not there yet. You have a timeout at 4 seconds. So same idea. So now let's say that I want to check that my store is displaying 8 license plates, because I should have these 8 license plates displayed, and I'm using Angular for this app, which means my license plates are components. And because they are components, it actually makes it easier to test. Makes it easier because I can use the component selector as my Cypress selector, right? Because we have that in Angular, so why not? And so if I want to test that we're displaying 8 license plates, I just navigate to my website. I get all of the app license plate components, and I should have 8 of them. So that's one line of code that's making sure, and this sounds simple, but it's actually testing a lot of things, right? This is testing that I have a component that communicates with a service, uses the HTTP client to get to the backend, download the data, and display those 8 components. So that's one line of code is testing all of that integration in a sense. And it's very typical when you start testing with Cypress, even with simple tests like this, you end up covering very quickly, over 60% of your Angular front-end code with just a few tests. So you get a very quick, very important return over your investment with very little code. Whereas with unit tests, if you want to get to 60% of coverage, it's gonna take quite some effort, right? It's gonna take quite a lot of work to get there. But when you do end-to-end, because you're loading everything on the screen and you're really testing the integration, one single thing like this is actually going to test, as I said, multiple components and services and HTTP clients and everything. So yeah, that's demo number 2, how to select multiple things and test them out. Now, of course, when we start interacting, when we start writing tests, we are going to do things over and over again, such as navigating to the page that you're testing. So you can use a before each function so that before each test, you have common things that you would do. Typically go to the page, log in, navigate to something, right? That's going to happen before every single test. So you can use a before each function for that, nice and easy. And the other thing I wanted to mention here is that if you're always using the same URL in your app, you can actually use the Cypress config to say, hey, this is my base URL for this project. And that way you don't have to repeat yourself with that URL over and over and over again, right? You just use that base URL, which means in my tests, I would just do cypress.visit/, right? And / would mean this main page. So everything becomes relative to that domain in the end when we start with that base URL. And in that Cypress config, you can also change the comment timeouts. So if 4 seconds is too slow or too fast or whatever, you can adjust that timer. Here I make it 10 seconds, for instance, so 10,000 milliseconds instead of 4. So I'll show before each to you with the next example, which is right there. So in that example, I just refactored a little bit so that we visit the home page using /. That's the base URL now in my project, so I don't have to repeat that store.angulartraining.com everywhere. It's now in the Cypress config. I have my base URL here. I set my default comment timeout to 5,000. And yeah, then the tests remain the same, only more readable because all I had in my test is the actual scenario that I'm testing. So I see a lot of questions in the chat, so maybe we can do another quick round of questions here. And oh yeah, there's a lot of them. So yeah. Mocks, I'm going to get into that. So I'm not answering the question just yet. what is your strategy to avoid writing brittle end-to-end tests? Yeah, that's a tricky thing, right? And that's the case with everything end-to-end. How do we make sure the tests consistently pass? There's really two ways that Cypress helps a lot with that. One is the automatic timeouts, right? Because most of the time, what makes an end-to-end test fail or pass and that kind of thing is that something takes longer than expected. Like the backend is slow, database is slower, and then the test fails. So having these automatic timeouts that wait and that you can configure help a lot, because if you know that the server you're doing your test on has a slower backend that's going to take 15 seconds sometimes, you can make an exception and say, hey, for this specific page, wait up to 15 seconds. And by the way, you can, the timeout that we saw in the global config here, you can make exceptions at the command level if you want, if you need. So if you know that on a specific page, in a specific scenario, things are a lot slower, you can pass another param here where you would have your own timeout. So if I know that loading these license plates takes 15 seconds or around 10 seconds, I can add a longer timeout just for that command. So that's one of the small things that makes our life easier and that can help make exceptions to avoid a test that passes or fails because sometimes it's slow. So that's one of the things we have. And another strategy is that when you do end-to-end, you rely on a real backend, right? Usually it's a test server where you have test data. And that data usually is stable, but you can have somebody else playing with it and breaking things. And then when you do your tests, the data is different and the test fails, for instance. So having a dedicated server just for end-to-end that nobody else is touching is important. That said, you can also have your test break the server, right? If you're testing the creation of something, like create a user and then delete it, and somehow the test fails because there's something wrong in the UI, you would maybe create, but then not delete. And so the next time you want to create, it doesn't work because the user is already there. So you can get into scenarios like this, and that's where mocking can help, which we're going to see how to do very, very soon, because you can mock the creation of the user, like pretend it works, that the server is okay with it, and that way you don't change the state of the database, which could break the next test, for instance. So it's really all about finding the right balance, right? Do we want to test everything, but then there's a risk of breaking the state of our database in the process and then have to fix it manually? Or do we want to test most of the functionality and then mock some of the things to make sure that our tests are more stable? There's there's no magic to it. It's all about testing things out and kind of finding the balance from experience and depending on the different tests that you have. So when a test becomes too painful and fails too often, then maybe use mocks instead and that sort of thing. That's the idea.
Yeah, I just want to chime in because I think that they have talked a little bit about mocks. I saw somebody talking about they mentioned recommendations of using attributes and selectors rather than just CSS attributes. I find that like it can also be pretty useful to have attributes that you target instead of looking at specific like paragraph elements, because if you're like restructure your template, then it might break. But if you only have a specific like a test ID attribute on that particular button, you can move around that button in this HTML tree without having it to break. So yeah, no, a lot of good questions here. Let's see.
There's plenty of questions.
yeah, a lot of them. I love it. Let's see.
And maybe I guess most of them are going to be answered by the next couple of things I'm going to talk about.
Yep. Yeah, I was just going to
I
say.
guess I can move ahead, make sure I cover, at least mocking and everything, and then we can get back to the questions that remain, and then I'm not answering in the process. But yeah, I looked at all of them, so now I know things I can mention along the way to kind of answer those questions as well. So yeah, the thing we talked about, like how do we interact with the UI? We so far we navigate to a page, we check that things are displayed properly. But what if we want to interact with the page, click around, fill out a form, and all of this? So the idea is similar. We select an element. So here I'm selecting the login element, and then we have a type command to type something in that form element. The cool thing about type is that it's going to simulate a user typing character by character. So it's not just going to set that string inside the element. You would see the text appearing character by character like this. So it's kind of simulating a user typing letter by letter, which is good because as we know, you could be having like an RxJS debounce or that kind of thing, and you'll be able to test that right in here because it's going to be character by character. So you type one thing, two things, and then you can use a click command to click on an element. And if you want to simulate different keys being pressed, like I want to test that my form gets submitted when we type enter on the keyboard, you can do that. They have shortcuts for several different keyboard keys, like enter, escape, tabs, even shortcuts like Control-C, Control-V. You can test all of these with these commands, which is pretty nice. So yeah, using this, I'll show you my next demo, my next code example. So now I want to test that we can navigate between multiple different pages. So on my landing page, I find the text, my cart, I click on it. This would navigate to the cart page, which should then be visible. And so checking that different pieces are present on that screen. And then I can navigate to the checkout page, and everything should be visible as well. So let's run that one. Not here. I'm going to close this, get back here, select that demo, number 4, testing navigation. So now we're testing different things, and as you can see, we are on a different page. So I can click on a single test. It shows me, and oops, there's some echo here. Okay, looks like it's fixed. So yeah, one of the key features of Cypress that I haven't mentioned yet is what they call time travel, which sounds fun, and it is, because when I go over one of my tests, I can go over any single command, and it's showing me the state of the application at that point in time. So here, contains checkout. Okay, this is what was found. It found the checkout button. Then we clicked on it, and it's showing me where the click happened. So Cypress clicks, in the middle of the button or the link that you select. And for each action, you can see a before and after. So this is before my click. If I click on after, it shows me that I'm on the checkout page. So I can see all of my UI transitions like this, just by selecting a command and then having that before and after state that I can just toggle on and off. So this is very important to check that a click does the right thing or an action ends up doing the right thing. And then yeah, as we saw earlier, any element that you select gets highlighted, so you can check that it did select the right thing and apply to the right place, which is pretty cool. So that's navigation. So interacting with the UI. Now, all of this can be refactored using custom commands. And so let's get to that slide. Here, 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 here. So if there's something you do over and over again in your app, and you want to make sure that you don't want to repeat yourself and you just want to refactor your code and do that over and over again, like logging in, that's a perfect example. Every Cypress app I've been testing, every website I've been testing with Cypress, we had some sort of login, right? And so instead of copy pasting the same 4 lines of code or more over and over again, you can tell Cypress, hey, here's a custom command. Here's a custom action I want to teach you so we can do it over and over again. So there's a commands.js file for that, where you can create your custom command. So this one, I call it login, takes an email and a password as a param. It's going to navigate to the login page, type the email, type the password, click on the submit button, right? And then if I want to use it, I just do cy.login with my email and password. So that's pretty powerful, right? Makes things a lot easier, makes things a lot cleaner as well. You can use that for, commands that you repeat like login, but you can also create your own assertions, right? Ways to check that your application is doing the right thing. So, for instance, one of the questions we had earlier was, you tested that you have 8 license plates on the screen, but you're not testing that these are the right plates, the right products with the right information, right? And so that's true, but I could create a command for that. And so that's what I want to show you now. We can have a command. So here I'm calling it check license plate at. And for each license plate, I'm going to check that the first one is 2008 Georgia license plate, and the price is $8. License plate number 2 should be New Jersey, price is $11. And that specific assertion, that specific command, I created it in the commands.js, which is support commands.js. And so if I scroll down here, that's how I created it. So basically using a funky selector to get the nth license plate on the screen based on the index. And then I'm making sure that it's containing the right string, and that should be visible. So that's my check license plate at command. And then it makes my test super easy to read, because I can just add as many strings that I want to check on the screen and checking everything. And once you have that, testing more advanced things. Like I mentioned, we can change the currency of my app. So look at how easy it is to test. I select my currency switcher component and I click on it. This means click here, so it opens a drop down. And then I want to select another currency and click on it. And I want to check that all of the prices have changed, right? That's what I want to test. So in the test, I say, hey, click on the drop down to open it, find the text euro and click on it, and then check that the license plate number 1 now has a price of 12 euros, number 2, 16.5 euros and everything. So here I'm testing tons of things. It's easy to read. I would say that you don't even have to be a developer to be able to read that most of the time, right? It's easy enough to kind of get the idea of what it's doing. And I'm reusing the same command. So my test with just a few lines of code is covering lots of ground, right? So that's custom commands and how they help, test more, refactor things, and go more in depth with what we're testing. Because now I'm really making sure that we're doing the right thing. We have the right order, the right text. There's no formatting issue, all of that. And of course, I could go deeper in these commands to check that there's an image for each plate, that they have the right CSS, you name it, right? We can even go deeper and check always more. Let's see. I want to get into mocking at least, which is probably my next thing. Yes, it is. So mocking with Cypress is as easy as it gets, because the idea is mostly what we want to mock is the server, right? You want to mock the request you make to a server and return a specific response. My store here is a good example. The exchange rates for these currencies are typically very dynamic and change all the time. So if I want my test to be stable, I need a way to set those exchange rates once for all and not rely on what are the current exchange rates. And so with Cypress, you can just say, intercept the traffic. So cypress.intercept, you give the API URL that you want to intercept. So in my case, /rates, and then you specify the object you want to return from the response. So here I'm intercepting any request to /rates and returning hard-coded exchange rates so that I know what to expect in terms of numbers and everything in my front end. And I can use that in my tests. So it's stable, the data is always the same, and I'm still checking that everything, the integration works properly. So that's super powerful. You can, if you need to mock something bigger, like you have a massive JSON object that you would return, you can actually refer to an external file. So it doesn't have to be hard-coded in JavaScript. You can have a file with that JSON, which allows you to reuse those mocks over and over again as well. And so here I'm saying, hey, intercept any request to /plates and returns the contents of plates.json instead. And Cypress has a fixtures folder where you can put those mocks and use them. And so, yeah, usually you would do that in your before each and say, hey, intercept this, intercept that. When you do an interception, you can give it a name. So when you do a mock, you can give it a name, and that name could be used to wait for some things to happen. So you can say, hey, wait for that request to return a data before going on. So cy.wait@rates. That's another possibility. If you know that you absolutely need that data to display components and it takes some time, instead of playing with the timing of extending for 10, 15 seconds, you can just say, hey, wait for this HTTP request to give us data, and then move on with the test. So yeah, just showing you that last example on mocking data. So now I'm using interception for my exchange rates. I'm using an interception to use my plates.json for license plates. So all of my data would be mocked at that point in the web app. And then my test can expect those exchange rates so that I know that they're stable. They are not going to fail in the future because we know we always get the same data from the server because we faked it, basically. Yeah, and if you need to intercept different domains, of course, you can use the full URL here. So it doesn't have to be relative. You can have the full path. So if it's api.whatever.com, you just use api.whatever.com. Yeah, that's all of the stuff I wanted to show you. And Cypress, I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But since we have a lot of questions, I think it's better to go through the questions. One last thing, though, that is super important. When you run your tests with Cypress for continuous integration, right? So when you run these on a continuous integration server, Cypress is going to record screenshots when a test fails, and also has the option to record a video of the test that fails. That way, if something fails in continuous integration, you can watch the video or these screenshots, and you get a good idea of what failed when, and basically it tells you what to look at, right? What to fix. So that's a very nice thing. It saves a lot of time, especially because sometimes things fail in continuous integration, but they work on your local machine, right? So it's difficult to figure out what's the issue. But here, because it's recording a video and screenshots, you have that track of what happened. And so you can see where things got wrong. And the video and the screenshots are the entire screen, just like this. So you see the commands on the left, you see the browser window on the right, and have the same visualization of everything that's going on. So yeah, I guess we can move to Q&A. Just want to, let's see, I think, yeah, that was my last slide. So there's a link here to my slides. You can use the QR code of this URL. And I just wanted to mention briefly that I'm also running the Angular certification program with certificates.dev. We have many different levels of certification from junior to senior. And because you attended this, we give you a coupon, which is ng-conf 20, that you can use there if you want to claim a certification exam with $20 off. So I'm just copy pasting that in the chat. That's for your info if you want to capture that. It's valid for the next 7 days. So yeah, we can do Q&A now. And I know there's lots of questions, so it's going to be tricky to find the ones to cover. Hopefully we answered most of the topics. And if you have questions after the session, feel free to reach out to me, LinkedIn, email, whatever. I'm always available to answer questions. Let's see.
Yes, I think that somebody in the beginning said, at the end of the talk, could you say why you choose Cypress over Playwright or the other way around?
Mm-hmm. So Cypress does a lot of things. Cypress was really designed with developer experience in mind. So, not having these timeouts, not having to use async await, having the entire experience integrated with the browser, the recordings and everything. These are all things that I don't think any of the competition does, right? So Playwright is a little bit lower level. It's maybe closer to what we used to do with WebDriver or Protractor or Selenium. The API is not as friendly and as complete as what Cypress does, from my perspective. So that's why, I would rather use Cypress if I had the option. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. What other interesting? We have a lot of good questions. Let's see. I mean, I kind of hijacked that question, but we had one question. Cypress makes the recommendation in their docs to use data attributes in the selectors rather than just CSS attributes like class/ID or component names. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so Cypress does have recommendations on that to use like a data-cypress ID when you want to select an element, which Cypress supports by default. So Cypress makes the assumption that you're going to follow that recommendation anyways, which is always a good thing. It's been the recommendation for end-to-end testing since forever to use, specific data attributes to select elements. So yeah, I would follow that rule as much as possible. Now, the nice thing, especially when we work with Angular, is that we can select components by their selector as well, which makes it a little bit easier, at least as long as we have selectors in Angular, which could change soon, we'll see. But yeah, data attributes are good, use them.
Yes, and I mean, let's see. We had a couple of questions regarding mocking backend calls, right? And you touched on them a little bit. We have the intercept side.intercept that is a great way to mock backend calls.
Exactly.
Any thoughts in general and opinions regarding mocking backend calls? pros, cons? When would you consider mocking versus when would you maybe not? And why, if that's the case?
Yeah, so that's always a tricky balance to find, because when you use mocks, obviously you're not testing the backend anymore, right? So you're not going all the way to the database, and so you leave some things out of the scope of the end-to-end test. But the benefit is if you're testing like CRUD operations, create, update, delete, and you mock things, then you're not messing with your backend database. So you have tests that tend to be more stable and are less likely to be brittle. So it's tricky. It's all about finding the right balance. Do we mock? Do we don't? Do we not do it? I would say my approach is to not mock as much as possible and only do it when we don't have any other option. Like the exchange rate stuff, for instance, in real life, this changes all the time. So there's no way we could go away with a test that's not using mock for that, right? So, but yeah, if you really want to test everything end to end, you don't want to have too many mocks. And the other approach you could have is to have two different kinds of tests, right? You could have tests that are truly end to end, and then there's no mocks. You just test everything end to end here. And then you have another set of similar tests where you mock things. So you focus on the UI only, right? That's a possibility as well. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You could have multiple different set of tests that run at different times of the day as well. It's all flexible. And the thing is, most of the time you're gonna learn about what the best approach is by doing it. And you'll see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. If your tests break the backend all the time and just put the database in the wrong state, then you're probably going to think, okay, we need to mock some of these scenarios because then it's impossible to maintain. So yeah, my takeaway, my final piece of advice would be to be pragmatic about it, go step by step, iterate, and mock whenever it becomes impossible to not do it.